you're probably seeing a lot of noise. Elon is doing stuff with Doge and it's breaking the economy, it's breaking the government, how there's fights between him and Marco Rubio. You might see the violence against Tesla employees and Tesla stores and Tesla's customers' cars. I mean, it's kind of wild that we're in the United States now and, saying stuff is now grounds for violence. It's pretty fudging crazy. But there's some stuff happening behind the scenes, sort of underneath the surface rather. The stuff, if you kind of sift through the noise, there's some pretty interesting data points to look at that are pretty eye-opening. And I'll start with this one. I know others have covered this, but I really found this to be very interesting. If you look at the chart, it looks at the survey respondents who consider buying a Tesla by party affiliation. Now, what's important about this chart is that it's at the start of 2022, and it doesn't really capture one side of the political spectrum all the way back to, say, 2020 or 2019. This basically says that in 2022, about 22% of people that were affiliated to the Democrat Party were considering buying a Tesla, and now it's down to 13%. But on the Republican side, that's a very interesting one, right? It went from about 17% in 2022 all the way to over 25%. And what's shocking about that is, number one, if you think about Tesla, the company, Tesla was a sort of green energy hippie. They love government subsidies, right? This sort of company that it was really dominated by people that were conscious about the environment, conscious about sustainable energy, or at least they wanted to appear as if they were conscious about that stuff, right? And as we've gone through the years and as we've sort of kicked off this 2025 cycle with Elon clearly throwing his weight behind one political candidate, we've seen a dramatic shift in which political party affiliates themselves to the brand or is considering the brand based on party affiliation. But what's even more interesting about this is that if you think about the total population per political party in the United States, half of the country is independent. So this is talking about the other half of the country. Now, it's quite obvious that, of course, if you're, let's say, an investor in the company, there's totally an argument that says, why are you even, as the owner of a company, why are you even trying to cater to a political party, right? But I think the underlying story here is that Tesla, for the longest time, I think, really since its inception, it has been viewed from a political lens. It has been viewed as this is a green energy company. This is a left Democrat person car. These are just California mobiles, right? These are just for the rich. That was constant rhetoric that I heard. And now it's flipped. It seems like it's completely flipped. Now that the owner is, saying things that might be uncomfortable for some people on that side of the spectrum, political spectrum, the other side of the spectrum has basically replied and it's like, okay, yeah, cool, we want that now. We like that, we're okay with that. Tell us more about that. To the point where if you just add up the net number of people that are considering a Tesla just based on party affiliation, it's basically even. That's a very interesting data point that we didn't have clarity for the longest time, and now we got that clarity. So what is the end result here? This is the counterintuitive sort of weird way of looking at this. And of course, tell me if I'm thinking about this incorrectly in the comments. When it comes to non-party affiliation, I think those people are going to be less worried about what the CEO's politics are and who they're supporting. And they're much more worried about how good is the product? Is it going to make me happy? Is it going to fulfill my needs for what I'm looking for in the product, right? And I think this is where the current political climate in the United States, really in the Western world, because everybody's freaking losing their minds over this Trump administration for whatever. I think it's going to be a lesson for a lot of people that old adage of any media is good media. I think this is going to be a perfect example of that. If you look at just legacy media sources, if you look at independent media sources, Elon, by default Trump, but also Elon's companies like SpaceX and Tesla are getting significantly more exposure to the public than they have been in the past. What that really means is like, hey, if nobody has any sort of understanding about you as a company, if your name isn't really part of the zeitgeist, if you have very low awareness by the general public, even a negative story is gonna put your name in the zeitgeist. One of the reasons why Kim Kardashian and those folks are so successful is because there is a host of people hating on them and that by default generates a lot of attention. Now, of course, people can make the argument, oh my God, why is a car brand, again, associated with a political party? Why is it like this? At the extremes, it totally is. We see it in the data. If you're a Republican, there's significantly more Republicans that are not considering a Tesla. If you're a Democrat, we were basically at historic lows, let's say, to consider a Tesla. But it's still the minority of the country. The rest of the country, I think, is going to operate in a very different way. Now, that's from a perception standpoint. I think from a technological standpoint, this is where the story gets, I think, again, if you're following at the periphery, you're missing so much that's happening. FSD in China, the full self-driving suite, the release. If you just go and look at a bunch of videos that are being shot in China, the overwhelming majority of the folks, I would almost garner to say almost everybody, literally almost everybody, is coming away extremely impressed at the performance of the suite. Basically saying that it's just as good, if not better, than all the ones that have been in China for a while. But the reason why this is so important is because the FSD team in China has been able to get the car to drive itself with minimal local data. They've had to rely on public videos and so on and so forth to get the system to work, in addition to all the things they've done in the US and Canada to get the system working. What this implies is that the self-driving system that Tesla has created, you can very easily just pick up and drop in other regions of the country with minimal training to get it to work. What does this mean? Now that Tesla is allowed to operate FSD in China, now that they're getting the data in from the local folks and they're allowed to sort of go through the roads and people are disengaging the system and so on and so forth, they're getting a ton more data. They're getting a ton more data to make the system even better. So if the system was already at the top or near the top and they're finally getting the data they need to actually get it to be extremely good, how it's supposed to work, then one can very safely assume that this system is going to be by far the best one in the country, by far. That's being completely missed. Very few people are talking about it. Only people that are following the story closely are fully understanding that and grasping that. Why is that such a big deal? China is by far the biggest car market in the world. And China is very tech forward, which is such a weird thing to think about when Western nations like Europe and the US and Canada are much more hesitant to adopt technology, whereas people in China are much more willing to adopt technology. That's a development that people are not talking about for the car brand specifically. They've just picked up and dropped a self-driving system with minimal training data that just works. That means that in Europe, once they do that, they'll have a very similar thing. They'll pick up and drop in Europe, and then the cars are gonna drive themselves very well in Europe, and then all they're gonna need is some iterations over the course of a few months, and all of a sudden you have by far best in class. On top of that, again, Tesla's releasing Cybercab Robotaxi in Austin in June. So that's their first foray into actual driverless rides or some sort of trial that they're going to push through in June. They'll probably have some sort of driver at the front of the wheel, if I were to guess, just because of regulations for the first few months. But this is the first time that Tesla's going to start offering driverless rides, basically like a Waymo. And by the end of the year, they should have a lot more areas open to them to be able to operate those vehicles. Again, something very few people are talking about. What does this mean for the brand? A lot of exposure when it comes to self-driving rides, because they have so many freaking cars on the road that can do this. This same technology that's allowing them to pick up and drop in China and Europe, it's going to allow them to offer driverless cars right here in the United States. And they don't have to make any new cars. They just turn on the existing fleet. They turn on the Model Ys and the Model 3s, of which there are, I think, probably a couple million in the United States that can offer this FSD. And all of a sudden, you have double the size of Uber in the United States that you can offer with self-driving rides if the owner would want to and if they're in those jurisdictions that allow it, right? Pretty crazy. And then on top of that, Tesla's releasing cheaper vehicles in the second half of this year, so in the next 3 months. Still not really sure what those are going to look like, but the guidance from the company has reiterated that these cheaper vehicles are going to be coming in the next couple months. So, and there's a lot of shutdowns happening with their factories to retool the lines. They're retooling the lines with the Model Y. They just released a brand new version of that. I'm sure you saw that if you follow the company closely. Very likely going to be, again, the best-selling car in the world. And that's going to be paired with cheaper models. That's going to be paired with some sort of compact car. Very likely going to be paired with some sort of van later this year, next year, which has been long rumored and people are waiting for it to come out, and God knows where that is, but I'm sure that will come out. There's a lot of stuff happening here with the company's offerings and their product lines where they're starting to hit the lower side of the market, the cheaper side of the market, in addition to making crazy advancements with the self-driving stuff that's been completely missed. You have the a gigantic boom in interest from one side of the political spectrum that would have never considered a Tesla are now seriously considering a Tesla. We're seeing the opposite on the other side. But again, these are the minority groups of the United States. The other half of the country, they're much more pragmatic. I would like to think they're much more, okay, like just tell me how much it costs. Is it going to serve what I'm looking for? And that this is where Tesla is very uniquely positioned as a car company to deliver the goods. And that's being completely missed. I don't know what that's going to do to the stock. I don't know what that's going to do to their short-term sales in the next couple quarters. But I am quite confident that I think by the end of the year, the people that are sort of out there saying, look at these sales drops because of Elon's politics, I think they're going to look very silly. I really think so. I think the combination of all these factors are going to make it impossible for people to not consider buying a Tesla because of their ability to get down to the lower market, their self-driving suite, and the fact that at this point, I don't think there's anybody that hasn't heard of the word Tesla. Whereas before we may have had some sort of awareness gap. Now that awareness gap doesn't exist, and as they release those cheaper models, that means that more and more cities and more areas are going to be flooded with these things, right? And at some point, people are going to be asking the question, I wonder what the hell is going on with this Tesla thing. They go on the Tesla website, oh shit, they have a $25,000 car. I didn't know that. Oh, it can drive itself? We'll see. And then one last thing. This one's interesting to think about because if you follow Elon Musk closely, he has said multiple times that he was going to stay at Tesla all the way through the Optimus program. And the Optimus program, this is their humanoid robot. This thing is slated to come out at some point in the next couple of years, probably specifically for factory use, for internal use, and then they'll start sort of selling it to other companies after that, and then it'll make it to the home at some point in the future. But what's interesting about that is, as of late, we're seeing a lot of podcasts and media runs with not Elon when it comes to being the front face of the company. We're seeing people like Lars Moravy, the head of engineering. We're seeing Franz von Holzhausen, who's the head of design. We just recently, JB Straubel, who's was one of the previous co-founders of Tesla, left for a little bit, now is back on the board. He just did a podcast with Ride the Lightning with Ryan. Highly recommend you check out that podcast. Phenomenal Tesla podcast for those people that are interested in the technology. And they did Jay Leno's Garage, and they did other interviews as well, Top Gear and stuff. I think there is a very, and I read this on X from somebody. This is kind of like, I'm curious to hear what people think about this. I think there's a very concerted effort to decouple Elon from Tesla. Some of that could be because of the politics, for sure. But I think for the long-term success of the company, at some point you have to sever the tie between Elon and Tesla so that Tesla can actually move on its own, so that it can move forward as a company selling more cars, selling more robots, selling more batteries, so on and so forth. And then let Elon go on his quest to do whatever he wants, right? I think that is happening now. I don't know, there's nothing like solid for me to sort of put this on, but I just think some of the stuff that's happening as of late, in my gut, I get a sense of like a succession plan. Great show, by the way, on HBO. Best show on earth, in my opinion. I think we're seeing some succession plans. I really do. I think in a couple years, if Elon decides to leave Tesla, I wouldn't be surprised. And it's not necessarily because of the politics of it. I think it's just going to be at the point where Tesla's going to be dominating so hard. They're going to have by far the best price per mile, by far the best technology in the car. Chinese competitors have really good technology and really vehicles as well. They're going to be close seconds, honestly, over time. They're very impressive. But I see it. It's like prime Apple under Steve Jobs vibes is what I'm getting. Is that the domination is going to be undeniable. I don't care how many Democrats don't want to buy Teslas, which is such an oxymoron, because you think about Tesla as a company, American company, advancing sustainable transport. Self-driving cars will be by far the best way to advance sustainable transport, because you're essentially replacing 2, 3, 4 cars with that need a driver with one that doesn't need a driver, that's also electric, that's super efficient. Weird. Now, Elon, of course, stokes the flames with his bullshit, but yeah, and to let Tesla do its thing. And maybe he doesn't even leave the company. Maybe he just takes a board position. Maybe he goes back to being head of the board and then maybe JB steps in as the CEO, or maybe Lars steps in as the CEO, or somebody else will step in as the CEO, and then have a SpaceX situation where you have your Gwen fucking kicking ass and taking names and driving that company forward, and then Elon's more just focused on the stuff that he should be focused on, which is mostly engineering. And I think the time for Tesla's coming up for that as well. So I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on that. It's kind of a windy video, sort of like off the cuff, but I just wanted to get my thoughts out there. So let me know what you think. If you enjoyed this, like and subscribe, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.